What if your favorite card became less playable over time, but more collectible? Welcome to Wonders Workshop today, everybody, and I am talking about how DBS and collectability kind of intermix and can shift the value of certain cards in Wonders of the First. Or more accurately, what I think they're going to do as the game progresses. Right now, we don't know. It's been like 4 months since the shattering, and time has not passed enough for anybody to say this is what is going to happen. If I ever say that, I'm mostly being speculative. We're all kind of just waiting to see what happens. I'm just trying to guess because it's like a fun giant puzzle and it's fun, and I just love hearing from everyone and seeing what everybody thinks. So, my argument is basically going to be that DBS doesn't just change gameplay, it's going to reshape how we think about value, rarity, and some long-term collectability. Now, some of you may be wondering, what is DBS? And DBS is a point-based system that basically assigns value to cards, and your deck has a total number based on what cards you're running and how many copies. And so it's meant to help create a balanced play system for players and make sure that you don't, I don't know if any of y'all play games a ton, other than Wonders, to be clear. But you've heard me say it once, I will say it again, I've been playing Magic for a while, like half my life. And there's this very subjective thing of my commander deck is power 6. Nobody really knows what that means. Nobody knows for certain that my deck actually is a 6. Yes, for those of you who are big Magic fans, I do know that system was updated and now it's built in and things. It's still not that easy. There's no built-in way to sit down at a table with your family. Like, my family and I sit down, like my parents, and we sit down with my cousins and my parent. We sit down and play at least once a week. And it's like, how do I pick what deck? Because I'm not breaking out my Edgar Markov beat-down ugliness to play if my mom is playing her newest, slightly modified Precon. That's not a fun game for anyone if, you're equally good players. Two equal skilled players playing different skill deck, different level of strength decks is not going to shake out in the way that everybody is hoping. So I'm kind of expecting that what the DBS is going to do is it's going to encourage balance, diversity, and adaptability in gameplay. We've already seen that Wonders is going to do frequent updates to the DBS. We got our first DBS update last month, and that's like I said, it's been not long since the shattering, so people are Tensman is paying attention to the meta, paying attention to what is going on, and trying to help balance the game in a way that makes it enjoyable for whether you want to play at your kitchen table or your dining room table with your family, and you want to make sure that you're not pulling out your barn burner stomp nonsense deck that's not going to be fun to play with your kids, or if you want to bring your most powerful 999 point deck to the 750 to 1,000 point range deck competition at the launch event for the next set. Whatever it is, it's meant to help balance decks. And so assigning each card individual values in how strong people think the decks are is meant to do just that. It's meant to say, if you want to run, let's say, a Phoenix Quill, obviously it got lowered. I think that has a little bit to do with them wanting people to play it, not so much with it not being as powerful. But in 5 years, if you want to run a Phoenix Quill and it's a like 100-point card, even 200, 300 points, you can still play it. It's just that that's 300 points that you can't have from other cards. You're making sacrifices if you want to run more powerful cards in what other cards you're putting in your deck. So that's kind of what DBS is. And so I want to talk a little bit about, what traditional collectability looks like in Magic and other CCGs. It's usually rare, power level / playability, the lore around it. Is it a pretty card? And how does it do in a tournament that results in, how valuable is the card? And there is a pattern. A card gets powerful, it gets expensive. It gets more expensive, it gets reprinted. The value drops. I have an Edgar Markov from not the most recent printing. I bought him 2 or 3 years ago. When I bought him for $60 and he was worth $120. It's now a $20 card. So, there is that risk involved with, other card games where you're getting reprints, or I've never had a card that I own in Magic get banned, but that can also tank the value of a card, because if nobody can play it, nobody really wants it. There's a few collectors out there, but they're just happy to be able to gobble it up for when it might be unbanned. Wonders, for those of you who don't know, is no reprints unless it's a serialized less than 1,000 reprint of an alt art of a card. So, we're not going to see real reprints that are going to drop a card. That's going to drastically increase the supply of a card. And the DBS is how Wonders is replacing BANS. Your card is never going to be banned in Wonders. At worst, it's going to be difficult to play it in a lightweight, featherweight class of, playing. I like to think of them as wrestling classes or boxing classes. 750 points and under, featherweight. And as you go up and down in what class you're playing in, you're making sacrifices. If you want to run a really DBS hungry point-based card, you can run it. It might just be harder to run it if you want to compete at a lower weight class. And I think that's fair. Having walked up to a table and been on both ends of absolutely gobsmacking the table because my deck was too strong, or being gobsmacked because somebody else's deck was too strong, I think this is a great way to ensure that games are fun. It's never fun when it feels like one person is playing and everybody else or the other person aren't playing and it's a one-sided game. At least in my opinion. I like it for about 5 minutes when I'm winning, and then it starts to get boring because, the other person isn't having fun. It's not the same level of competition if you're just stomping somebody into the ground. And so I think this DBS is going to alter the collectability formula a little bit. I think if a card is scarce, like Mythics, and extremely playable, it's going to peak. We've seen a lot of the high play Mythics are really high in value right now. That, and if they're really wanted. And so I think if a card is scarce, playable, and it has a low DBS because it snuck under the radar when Wonders was assigning it for the first time. There's a combo that somebody missed. The Wonders team is human. That's life. People miss things. It's gonna skyrocket in value. Maybe not skyrocket. I think it will go up in value. If there's a scarce, playable, low DBS card, it will go up in value temporarily until the DBS brings it back down, and I think that'll kind of match price on the way back down. I think another aspect that we could see is the most the highest DBS cards, you know, they're not getting banned. They're still going to be playable, but I think there will be an extra layer of prestige for collectors to try and hunt those. Like some collectors, if they get in later, may, you know, instead of hunting all the cards from a set, they may hunt all the cards above 300 DBS. Or, you know, whatever the number is at the time, whatever number is meta. Because those are the most powerful cards in the game, and that's a really cool thing to collect, especially if you have the money to do so. I think the last thing is that there are going to be some low DBS cards that, you know, they might be a common and they're moderately useful, that like they're decent. They're not the bottom rung of DBS, but they're common cards. They're decently playable across the board. I think those we might see go up in value over time, as, you know, the supply goes down because they're not getting reprinted, and more people are wanting to run them because more people are involved in the game, because hopefully the game grows with every set and every day. And so even if it's not super high, there's going to be some, I think, some low DBS cards that will increase in value when future metas raise their importance. And so, you know, it might also be that, you know, we find out in 5 sets that there's a card that, you know, perfectly synergizes with Moonfire Crystal Mouse. And then Moonfire Crystal Mouse will shoot up in value. I know he's not a low DBS card, but it's the first card that came to mind. He's adorable. The Moonfire Crystal Mouse might shoot up in value, but there's not a fast enough DBS correct to match this raise in value, as a lot of people want this older card that there's not as many copies of. Of course, I'm speaking in all hypotheticals. I don't know what the answer is. I think the last thing, and this is not different from other card games, there are going to be cards that people collect and have high value because there's an emotional attachment, there's provenance, there's a story to them, a living, you know, cards start to get a sort of life to them if they're around for long enough. Like the Emma card, like Chasing Emma, she has her own story, not just because she has lore, but because of the community and that sort of thing. And I think there are going to be cards that are associated with tournament wins or DBS changes that gain that sort of narrative value, that story to them that people are going to want to collect. And I think that will be the other area that's, you know, DBS could affect that. It might not, but it's just something to be aware of, because I think that's going to kind of match with DBS, but not necessarily be because of DBS. And so I think, you know, it's harder for me to put on the collectors and investors hat, because I'm not in that weight class of money and, you know, collecting. But I think there are a couple of things that if you know, you like to collect a little like me, or, you know, you're a big collector, I think there's a couple of things that people can watch for if they want to try and kind of gamble on what cards they think will gain value over time. And, you know, I think there's a couple of cards and things that we can watch for. I think flexible cards that can be used in many decks, like meta cards, Moonfire Crystal Mouse, Seer's Gaze, I think those are only going to go up in value. I think even if they're commons or uncommons, with time, they are only going to go up in value. I think cards that dodge the DBS system to begin with, if you can get them before people realize what's going on, I think if you can get those cards and they go up, or even if their DBS stays low but they stay meta, those cards will be valuable. And I think, of course, the flashy high DBS cards that become like nostalgic icons, like Phoenix Quill, like Emma, like all these cards are going to become icons of the game. And I think those cards are going to only go up in value in time as well. So I think the big strategies here for people who are trying to figure it out are to track what DBS changes you're seeing. Are there anything interesting that makes you think that maybe you should purchase a card because there's something that's higher or lower than you might expect? Something, as my grandma might say, something a little hinky, that just makes you ask questions. And of course, watch for any undervalued cards that, you know, might not be super meta, but they might rise in lore, or you think there's a chance they might soon be meta and you can get them for a bulk price, that sort of thing. There's just, you know, a lot of things that you can watch out for if you're trying to figure out what cards to think about buying for long-term investments. Obviously, I could be wrong on any of that. And we don't know what the DBS is going to look like going forward. I don't know what the Wonders team is going to do. Nobody does. I think it'll be really interesting to see if, you know, there are cards that are not designed, but there are cards that almost feel like they're made for short-term play versus long-term collectability. Like, I wouldn't be surprised, and I think I made a video about staples, and I'll be sure to post that one before this, and I think I talked about that. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a card for removal in every Wonder set. Banish target Wonder. We're gonna see. I would not be surprised if we see that. I wouldn't be surprised if some of those cards seem more designed for short-term play, to keep, you know, kind of the staple abilities of cards that you need in decks accessible to new players, versus other cards that, you know, the First or the Phoenix Quill, that are designed to be powerful and most likely long-term collectible. I mean, all of the cards are going to be designed for short-term play and long-term collectability, but I think it'll be interesting to see what cards fall into which category in the meta. And I think it'll be really interesting as there are more and more and more and more and more and more and more cards, how well the DBS can keep up. I have faith that the Wonders team is going to figure it out, but I wonder if, you know, there will be cards that, you know, aren't getting the love that the Wonders team wish they got, and they'll put out something to help make that card a little better, you know, something that combos well with it. Or if there's cards that are designed to rise in DBS over time that we don't even know about. They might be in this set already, and over time we'll start to realize how valuable they are, and we have no way of knowing now. You know, I think there's just a lot of things that it's going to be really interesting to see what the Wonders team does. And so I'm going to kind of wrap us up here. I think DBS makes Wonders dynamic in both gameplay and collectabilities. Collectability. I think players, collectors, whatever title you want to slap on your forehead and call yourself, I think we're gonna have to think beyond just rarity, because DBS is a new axis of value. Like, if playability and you know, rarity are your X and Y axis, I think adding in the DBS is changing the whole system, and it's requiring people to think in a new way. And so, you know, I would love to think, aside from the obvious cards, we know what the obvious cards are. What card do you think, like, is gonna become the next big card? Like, maybe the Black Lotus of Wonders. Like, powerful, hard to get, unforgettable. Even if it's not necessarily, like, it doesn't have to be a mythic. It could be a common, and you think people are gonna snap up copies of it because it's such a meta common that, You know, you're expecting it for it to be hard for people to get their hands on in the future. That's kind of what I've got for today. As always, please like, comment, subscribe, and keep being your wonderful selves.